Shelby Oaks, a woman's obsessive search to find her missing sister, deals with a terrifying mystery that leads her into an unknown evil. Hello and welcome to Cinema, where we focus on a film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of Shelby Oaks. Is it good, is it bad, or somewhere right in the middle? Did you get stuck with eyes this time? Let's take it into the positive. With the start of this film, we're kicked off into something that gets me locked in all the way throughout. There's some thrills and excitement throughout. The suspense leads you through something that's you're really seeing certain parallels to other films, ties to horror tropes and other things along that line, but there still is a unique concept that really landed well with me. The search for a missing sister, dealing with exorcism, dealing with demonic supernatural stuff, and taking on this start of the film before the title card, we sort of get a blend between documentary style and the found footage of the missing sister, things dealing with this paranoids. That's a YouTube channel that this sister is trying to start with her friends, and we're figuring out things about her friends may have died or something along the lines of that, and Riley Brennan, the sister, is still missing, and we're getting a tie-in with Mia as the main character that tracks down what all these pieces of information means. A certain piece of evidence comes up at some certain point, and that's what leads her to become motivated, to become more obsessed with trying to navigate that as she deals with her own husband just as well, things at home, but also figuring out things along the way that picks up some interesting elements. It's a blend of different horror genres, but still manages to maintain a pretty strong focus throughout, especially right after you're getting that blend. It goes throughout studying different film cameras and everything about these things that are caught on tape from the paranormal paranoids, and how you're tracking along with that YouTube channel. With there's a connection with that me as a movie critic, connecting it to Chris Stuckmann as a movie critic. I really highly appreciate the design of the filmmaking, everything that's going along with that. I really don't follow him much because I don't watch many movie reviews on YouTube in general, so I can keep my own style. But following about what he has to speak on with this, there's something that shows he has a craftsmanship to what he's going about with his writing, with his visual standpoint, that shows there's a clear sense of what looks good, how to maneuver the camera, doing all these ins and out, and keeping the camera moving in the sense where there's an action scene or something's constantly moving, and the camera moves at the same pace toward or against that activity in order to make you feel a certain tension. And that's what I really enjoy and was constantly drawn into this film for, was not the fact that it was taking all of these horror tropes, things I've seen before in other films and sometimes done better, but the fact that this still was a story that drew me in, captivated me despite some of the generalities, feeling like a true crime story or documentary that I myself am a big fan of following that sort of stuff from time to time. So the constant movement with this, the production value, including having Mike Flanagan on board for that production, makes it look really good. The lighting, everything, you're tracking light when you're trying to cover a face with darkness, or the supernatural beings, whether it's the glowing eyes, the demons that are included at certain points, what you're getting to see. It all leads on to something that's really not necessarily big and a grand spectacle, but with this limited budget, there's something that's still crafted well and efficiently with all the design. And what we get out of the cast, Camille Sullivan especially as the main lead, as Mia, just really brings out something that's pretty convincing to the role. A serious ounce of just terrifying ounce of where we're following about with these characters, and seeing how Riley is transformed in some sort of way. If you get to see her later on whether you're tracking along with those videotapes, becomes an interesting component that this film manages to juggle with all these other types of forms while you're discovering the mystery that ultimately captivated me throughout all the general runtime that was pretty quick to some general extent. It didn't overstay its welcome, and it landed itself well with a pretty shocking plot twist at the end that felt me with a bit of a mixture of feelings, but ultimately feeling there was a good craftsmanship to the overall work that I feel he was getting toward what he was intending. Which takes me into the mix element. There's things throughout where if you're sort of mixed on what the beginning is, it's a mix of the documentary versus the found footage style, as they're sort of trying to navigate the aftermath of Riley's disappearance as well as the other members of that team, but also this sudden switch to just a simple narrative could throw some people off. The generalities of that could just throw a bit of indifference toward your feelings. Maybe there's points of the story that go a little slower than others. If you aren't a huge fan of cinematography looking expertly good, and it doesn't affect you if it looks more bland, then this one you would more so have to enjoy what the immersiveness of the experience is, what the shock value of sudden jump scares or different aspects of the horror tropes that this is constantly running its game with horror tropes or other things that are popular for a reason, and it's not bad that they're being utilized, but I know there's some people that can get tired of them, that if the story isn't connecting with you, then the horror tropes may downgrade this film that much more based on the fact that with other films that have bigger budgets for their horror movies, of course, those films can do better things, bigger things with those sort of tropes or creating unique substance, whereas this just follows along the lines of beat after beat, hitting a checklist of all the different things that Chris Stuckmann obviously would be familiar with because he's often known as a horror critic, but following about that can be a little tiresome, and it can be a little disappointing that there isn't necessarily anything that's really well standing out besides some bold choices done here and there, especially near the ending, which, speaking on the ending, though it connected with me personally, there was a bit of a mixed bag with it, with the way you're falling about with the characters as a whole and the integration to a bold choice that's made, where it throws you off with what it's doing and then makes these different choices, which of course concludes the film and likely not getting a sequel or just following along the generalities of it, but that could just be someone that really enjoys that, or it's throwing you off completely. I enjoyed an aspect to it, and I do love the bold attempts made when you do make a daring choice like it, but of course I do need to address it for the generality of some people maybe on the side where they completely disregard it and just don't care for it at all, and it throws off their whole experience, versus those that really like the bold choice and what it ultimately brings as a twist for the film and what you came to expect from the beginning. And taking it into the negatives, ultimately there's things here and there contriving the story forward, bringing about some conveniences and things that leans into what I was talking about with the horror tropes. There's so much of them compiled together, it feels like a checklist, which aren't necessarily bad on their own terms, but when there's certain things or characters leading into directions that they should get help for, or ultimately get a little bit of guidance toward what they should do, planning before they jump into a dangerous situation, following around this dark room, or doing other things that mistakenly lead them into the wrong circumstance. There just so happens to be certain areas that feel contrived in the way we're leading Mia to where she needs to be at when ultimately trying to investigate the situation. But while there is some leniency to just suspending your disbelief, letting the plot flow as it goes, there's still just a problem with the consistency of how that ultimately works, how the supernatural may take over, and what that ultimately entails for some parts of the plot. And another aspect of the story that really stood out to me is that near the beginning, they address that it's 12 years after the disappearance of Riley Brennan, whether she's gone or dead for good, is a question you try and figure out throughout the whole film. But there's also an aspect to that where there was a big splurge to people getting attention to their YouTube channel of the people that disappeared on the paranormal podcast. And also, there's an aspect of where it led onto that it gained popularity in the town and around that city area. And yet, 12 years later, while you're not getting the aspect where the townspeople are involved, the budget was probably too small to get any sort of involvement. And even that is not necessarily necessary for the story to have included if it decided to go in that direction. But ultimately, when there's graffiti everywhere asking, where is Wiley Brennan, what it ultimately leads into is just a questionable entail to if this really would happen in real life, that so many years after, this is still being a topic of discussion, that they're making a documentary about this missing girl still. Yes, some aspects of that still may be true because of the uprising of that channel, but there's also a part where everything about that would end up dying down, and especially 12 years after, I feel like they needed to shorten some of that timeline, not make it so spread out to where, yes, there is an essential point based on the ending, that there needs to be a gap of time in order for the ending aspect, the third act, to make sense as it is, but not so far out that it just bleeds forth what the problems could entail from the realism that you're juggling with as a whole. So that's just my personal thoughts on Chris Stuckmann's Shelby Oaks, which I have to rate a simply 7.5 out of 10. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of Shelby Oaks. Was it good? Was it bad? Or somewhere right in the middle? Or if you're waiting for this review and now going to see this film or not, based on my recommendation and review, make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already to join the info culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. So let's just all make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.